think we need to start charging you for storage, and then you're going to have to make those decisions. And I think it's going to be hopefully the market will adjust to deal with that. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, some great questions there. Great talk, Graham. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Right, so we're going to press on. I did this last time when we were over at the previous venue we were at, and I've forgotten the name of it, which was to point... Global Logic, thank you very much. Point out that the toilets are over there, and the fire exits are not right next to the toilets. We also missed a sponsor off. We're ably supported by the JFrog folks as well. We lost a slide for them, so thank you very much to the JFrog folks for sponsoring us as well. So that's the administrivia over with. So now I'm going to hand over to Gabriel, who I haven't seen for 5 years, since he last spoke at our meetup on... What did you speak about last time? Can you remember? Chaos engineering, yeah, it was a meetup over at Sapient Nitro.
I'm a bit embarrassed when I look back at that talk. But
Go and find his talk on YouTube.
yeah. Early days. Fine.
Anyway, he's back. Gabriel is back, and he's going to talk about Crossplane. Who's using Crossplane here? Luke is using it. Oh, sorry, I'm spoiling your talk.
Well, fine, that's fine.
All right. So, Luke, when he asks that question, just pretend to be surprised, okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Cool stuff. Okay, I'll shut up now and let Gabriel get on with it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me, London DevOps and the Devo team.
Pleasure.
Matt has asked who's using Crossplane, but how many of you have heard of Crossplane? Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, not many. Good. Fine. It's a very interesting piece of technology, and we're gonna cover it, and I'm gonna talk you through some of the learnings we had so far. So I'm Gabriel. I'm of course a platform engineer because DevOps is that, right? At JPMorgan, and before we start, I definitely have to cover a couple of things. I work for JPMorgan, so I really need to say this. Opinions are my own. I'm not here representing, it's not an official JPMorgan talk. It's me talking about my experiences and what I think about this technology. So that's what I'm doing today. And then I also wanted to say a couple of other things. This is not, of course, an in-depth Crossplane session, because that would probably kill you, especially after a very good presentation and some pizza. And also, I'm just so that we set the expectation right, I'm not here to criticize other infrastructure as code tools. I'm not here to say that you cannot do the same things with Terraform or Pulumi or whatever. It's just some insights on Crossplane. So I'm quickly going to cover a quick overview of Crossplane so that you kind of understand somehow what it does. What are the strengths and weaknesses of Crossplane and some of the learnings we had looking at those things, and then a bit of a demo, hopefully. So why Crossplane? Why do we need another infrastructure as code tool in an ecosystem that's already full of infrastructure as code tools, CDKs, and you name it? Well, I mean, Crossplane basically it's a framework to build control plane based platforms. And I know it seems like a useless statement, but actually you're gonna see that it's very different the approach they take, and it makes a lot of difference. But before we get into how Crossplane works, then maybe we need to take a step back and think of what does it mean building platforms. I always joke and I say that actually if you have been doing DevOps right in the last 6, 7, 10 years, probably you've always done platform in a way. And so when you think about a platform and the main examples you think about, it could be AWS, could be GCP, and one of the first things that come to your mind is having a well-defined and extensible and secure interface. Because that's the first thing you want to offer to your customer, right? How are your customer gonna talk with your platform? And of course, you also want a high degree of automation. A lot of companies, and this is still happening, and I've seen it many, many times, a lot of companies still have very well-defined interfaces, except those interfaces are tickets. So you create a ticket and someone's gonna create a database for you. So again, probably that's not really the best definition of a platform, so you want a lot of automation in there, right? And then, of course, if you wanna serve customers, whether it's internal customers, especially if it's a scale, or external customers, you want it to be available, which also means that reliable, scalable, and so on and so forth. And of course, that you also want it to be observable, because there's probably going to be a lot of stuff going on in your platform, right? It's not as simple as it looks. So how does Crossplane work? Well, I mean, Crossplane takes like an approach that is very Kubernetes-centric. And this is where things are slightly different from other tools. So you need a Kubernetes cluster, of course, and this is where Crossplane is going to sit. And basically, your customer, your consumer, are going to be interacting with Kubernetes, whether it's straight with a Kubernetes API, or if you want to wrap it in something else, a REST API that you do yourself. It's not up to you, but basically, you already have an API there. And then it interacts with all these external providers. That could be AWS, GCP, but it can also be things such as Helm or Terraform, because you might not only want to create cloud resources, you might be interested in deploying applications, for example, in other clusters, or just using your Terraform code, but like still having an interface in front of it. And so what Crossplane does is, for each resource that exists externally, it creates a custom resource definition, and it creates like a representation of that resource in the cluster. Which means if you have a database and an RDS database, then you're going to have an equivalent Kubernetes object that represents that database. And so on, like for every other thing that you deploy through Crossplane. Now, I'm going to try to walk you through the building blocks, and I'll try to do it without annoying you too much, because Crossplane can be a bit complex, but we'll see. So if we kind of try to layer it a bit, you could think of, I'm going to start top down, because what we really want to see is like, how do our customers interact with us? And so at the very top level, you have developers consuming your resources, and you have these things called claims that we're going to see that basically are just manifests. So think of a Kubernetes manifest, a piece of YAML. We're all YAML engineers at the end of the day. So that's how people can consume your resources. And then it's up to you, again, whether you want to wrap it into something else, whether you want to use a GitOps approach, or you want to give them access to the cluster. It's entirely up to you. And then at a slightly lower level, we have this concept of compositions and XR, which are composite resources. So compositions are like, you can think of them as templates, right? Now, you don't just want to give people a database, or you don't want to give them just a bucket. Especially when you work in enterprise and there's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of things, you can't just like give them raw resources. You wanna have a stack, which probably includes some permissions, some policies, some actual resources, the instances, maybe databases, maybe load balancers, maybe VPCs, but you want to pack them in a way that makes sense for your business, right? And then those templates are called compositions, and when you instantiate one of those templates with actual values, for example, I need a thing, full stack called this or that, with these values for my database, or with these values for my bucket, or whatever. It's materialized inside your cluster as a composite resource. Now, in between these two things, that's what is defined as XRDs, or composite resource definitions, which is nothing more than really a kind of classic Kubernetes CRD. So you can define your own API, and that's where you establish how your consumers, your customers can actually pass this data, can actually call your API and instantiate some of these templates that we've just talked about. And then there's like of more traditional concepts such as providers that you also have in Terraform and so on and so forth. In fact, a lot of the providers are actually Kubernetes providers that are wrapped into something else. And basically, if each provider defines effectively how you interact with the APIs of the cloud provider, which means if you instantiate a database, an RDS, then you're going to have like an equivalent RDS object in your cluster, and that's what the provider does for you. And then bottom layer of the stack is effectively what's outside of our control, what's outside of the Crossplane world. Now, we've been talking about Kubernetes and all of these resources. And if you've worked with Kubernetes, then you know that's basically all YAML, right? It's all YAML based, which means, if you've been around for some time, you start to think, one of the first things that people think about Crossplane is like, well, if I write YAML, then how do I do dynamic stuff? Because I can't really do, things inside YAML. If it's fully declarative, then it's going to be complicated. And so Crossplane has the concept of functions, and basically functions are effectively functions that transform your YAML so that you can actually do some looping, and you can also use some outputs from one resource and put it into the other one, and so on and so forth, right? And there are some functions that are already provided by Crossplane. One is patch and transform, which is probably the thing, if you try Crossplane, you're going to be using it a lot. And the other one, which is fairly recent, it's the Go templating function. So that allows to bring a lot of dynamic pieces into place. Now, I know it's a lot of information all at once, so I don't expect you to fully ingest that. Like, I don't have to take all the data. If you don't need it, you can just let it go. We've been talking about data before, so don't have to store it out. But the benefits of Crossplane itself, I think this is where things get very, very interesting. So first of all, we talk about building platforms, right? And so one of the things is that with Crossplane, you get out of the box the Kubernetes API. So that's a great interface. It's a mature interface. It's extensible. You have all the kind of Kubernetes role-based access control built in already. So you can leverage that, and it's very powerful. And it's very easy also to create a custom definition and so on and so forth. Crossplane tackles straight away out of the box the drift detection and reconciliation, which is something you can do easily with automation with other tools as well. But Crossplane was built that way. So if anything changes in your cloud provider, you always have a manifest, the desired state of your resource in your cluster, and it's going to leverage Kubernetes reconciliation loops so that actually you can go and reapply the resource and make sure it's always the way you want it to be. Availability kind of comes a bit out of the box. I mean, not really. I'm making it. I'm oversimplifying here. But you have Kubernetes, right? Which means you can leverage the Kubernetes scale, and so you can really make sure you get your platform running. And there's already it's quite a mature platform, and so that's pretty good. And one thing that I find incredibly interesting about Crossplane is that actually, because of this concept that from your template, then you have actual resource definitions for each one of the external elements, it kind of brings this idea of resource level observability, which you don't really get very easily with a big state and stuff. In this case, every resource that living outside your cluster, outside your Crossplane ecosystem, is mapped to a resource in your cluster, so you can always observe that resource and see what's the state of the resource, which I think it's pretty cool. It's all great, right? It's amazing. Up to this point, everyone said, okay, well, when do we start using Crossplane? Well, truth is, Crossplane, I think, has a lot of potential, but there are some areas where, if you're going to start using it, you need to think about a few things. And I've divided this in three main areas. The first one being the state of the project. So although Crossplane's been around for some time, I think adoption is really kind of starting to come now. And so there's a lot of things that are still maturing, alpha and beta are kind of the new GA. So you need to get used that everything is alpha, everything is beta, and if you're lucky, your manifest and your stuff is still going to work in 6 months, but that's unlikely to happen. In fact, we had to change ours just in the last few months a couple of times. But that's fine. It's okay. It's what you would expect from a tool that's maturing. The developer experience is a bit poor. In fact, I think that there's quite a few items that they have in their roadmap to improve the developer experience. And the reason being is that because of the fact that everything is represented individually as a single Kubernetes resource, that kind of means you can kind of get lost into things, especially when you get into very complex pieces of infrastructure. You have a very small claim, someone calling your API and saying, oh, well, I need just a stack that is this size and that has this name. And that actually creates 135 resources for you. And then you never know where it's failing. And it does have messaging and, it does have events and stuff, but sometimes it can be very difficult to debug. And, it's kind of very associated to this. I've covered a lot of concept in a very short period of time. And so it has a very steep learning curve. That is particularly bad when you think about the fact that there are also limited resources around in the web. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I really wanted to share our learnings. It's because I was desperately trying to find a book. And it turns out that there's one book in O'Reilly's, which is your sponsor as well. In all fairness, I'm not going to comment on that specific book. But there isn't a lot of material, and also courses are missing, right? So it's difficult, and also you can't find many success stories. So the second thing is, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something you will learn very fast with Crossplane. It requires a lot of discipline, but I'm saying like a lot, literally, because effectively, if people are accessing your clusters and then they can create resources and you don't know how to track those resources, and they could be using your top level API that creates 127 resources that we said before, but they could also be using resources if you, for example, don't have a good role-based access control strategy in place. And also it means like you need to have a lot of maintenance and hygiene of your cluster, because now all the state of all your resources are in that cluster, right? Which means backups and all the things. And it also installs a lot of CRDs. I'm going to show that in a second. They're doing some work as well on the deployment of configuration and packages, because there's this very cool concept of the fact that you can pack all your APIs. Let's say, my team is building APIs that are around a specific business scenario. We can pack them all together and deploy them to a cluster so that we make them available for everyone. Problem is, if you get an issue with that, you can have a cascade effect that is pretty bad, where things start reconciling, and well, I'll let you guess what happens after. And then very last thing is that it really feels like it's a bit like it can be a bit of a complementary tool, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be your main tool or your only tool for infrastructure as code. Because first of all, if you thought you had a chicken and egg problem with the Terraform state and the S3 bucket, well, guess what? You need a cluster to run Crossplane. So, someone, it needs to exist some way, right? So probably you will do it with Terraform or with something else. But and also the last 2 points, which are very, very much related, is like, do you really need to reconcile everything? And that's something, I think a lot of companies just buy into a tool and into a specific way of doing things. But the reality is, you might need to reconcile some of the things. You might need those platform capabilities for certain parts of your infrastructure state. But there are things you might want to just apply once and forget, or at least not necessarily forget, but at least not change very often, and you don't really necessarily have the need to constantly reconcile. So I've tried to be very light, because I know it's late, and so I'll try to show you some of these things I was talking about. And I'll start by showing you what a claim looks like. So I have a claim that I've already created earlier, so I'm just going to move on to this one. So this is what a claim looks like, and it's as you can see, looks extremely simple. Is it readable? Okay, so it looks extremely simple, and basically one of your, let's say, development team could request an entire stack just by using this small manifest. And in fact, I'm just going to do it now. I think we do have one here. Sorry, I have just one hand. Give me a second. Thank you. Thanks. So I'm going to apply these things just to show you what happens. I'm kind of monitoring this thing. As you can see, if you look what I'm looking at, this is K9S. If you don't use it, you should. But anyway, I'm looking at specific resources at my Kubernetes cluster that is simple apps. And I have now two of them. One is ready because I've applied it before coming here. And then one is synced, which means it's now in our cluster, but it's not ready because probably things are being created. So this simple app is an API that I have defined. So if I look at how I have defined this API, so there's a part which is my definition, which is it's a composite resource definition, but it's gonna look very familiar to you if you've done CRDs. You can define which are the fields that you need in your claim, what type they are, and then you can set some defaults if you want. And then you can also set what's actually required. And you can also set something that is status. This is particularly important because it's basically what Crossplane would, in a way, give you back from all those resources that's creating. And so you can, for example, say, okay, I'm going to need to know what the instance ID is, what the bucket is, and so on and so forth. And you can push all those things to the status. And this is what a composition looks like, right? Now, this is where things become a bit tricky because in this composition, I'm creating just an EC2 instance, and then creating an asset bucket, and then I'm creating an RDS instance. Now, if you look at the whole file, this is about 160 lines just for 3 resources, which can seem a lot, and actually it is a lot, right? And it's because of the fact this, patch and transform thing works, these functions works, and so basically, in order for me to be able to use some of those values that my developer have declared inside a claim, I need to, read from that claim, and then I need to patch my current resource and so on and so forth. This is a bit of a complex thing, so I think maybe we can skip it for now. But yeah, the interesting thing is that if I go back to my cluster, thing is still being created, but if I go to my AWS account, what I expect is this is the RDS instance that was already there. And there should be one that's being created. There you go. Hopefully my AWS bill is not going to be too big at the end of the month. But, and same thing for instances, right? So I have an instance here. Yeah, both of them are running. So one is the test stack that was already there, and the other one's demo stack that you can see it's initializing right now. Let me make this slightly bigger. And the same thing for our S3 buckets.
Sorry, computer chat down, please, folks.
There you go. There you go. That's our demo bucket that's just been created. Now, I think this is it's kind of covered in the sense that it's very difficult to go very deep on the topic, I think. So, thank you. It's very difficult to go very deep on the topic, but what it's very, very interesting is that, what's powerful is this, right? You have a very small claim, you have very small interface for your developers, and just with that, they can go off and create all the infrastructure they need. And what you can do is your platform teams or DevOps teams or infra team, whatever you want to call them, I'm not particularly picky on naming. So your platform team can actually be building all that kind of compliance and all the things you need, all the resources you need as part of the stack, and you can hide all of that from your developers. In the same way that when you go and you create the S3 bucket, which seems to be the most simple way, the most simple thing ever, there's actually a lot of things that are happening inside AWS, which we don't really want to see, especially because probably data is replicated 10 times or 100 times. And so imagine how much carbon footprint. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you something, and it's one last thing. So in this cluster, I've installed the AWS provider, and guess what? this is all the custom resource definitions that are created by that provider. And it's actually, if you count them, it's actually 917, which means this is one of the things I was referring to when I said like you need to be careful. Now, providers have now been breaking down into families, so you could be installing just S3, for example, if you only need S3 instead of all of the things. But chances are it's going to become annoying to manage all of those providers. So that's kind of the parts where I think Crossplane still needs to get better at giving a better experience. But yeah, I think I've shown a lot, and I know it's a lot to process. So I'm going to stop here for now.
Okay, brilliant stuff. Thank you, Gabriel. All right, we're quite tight on time. Does anybody have a concise question? Go on then, Michael.
Thank you. If you can go back in time to when you picked Crossplane, would you still have done the same thing now, having used it, or would you have chosen something else?
Again, I think, actually, that's a good question. I actually had a couple of slides more, which is, so what's the verdict, right? Thank you for reminding me that. So that was the verdict.
Great question.
Actually, the verdict is, it depends, right? As most of the question is really for everyone to answer, depending on the scenario. I think what Crossplane is very good at solving is that dynamic element of needing, dynamic infrastructure to be created. And I think, in all fairness, there's a lot of things I don't necessarily like about Crossplane, but at the same time, it's very powerful. And if I start to think on how I would do the same things that Crossplane does for me with other tools, it's kind of a bit overwhelming, in all fairness. So I think I think I would probably.
Okay, all right, one more question over here. The man with the OpenShift t-shirt.
Hi. What's the benefit of something like Crossplane versus something like AWS ACK? Did you look at ACK before you looked at Crossplane?
I think they are very similar. I haven't actually used it, but I've seen when there's a lot of comparison, a GCPS config connector, which is kind of same concept, right? So I think it's probably very similar. I don't think there's a lot of difference. The only difference is that AWS locks you in with that specific thing. Crossplane, it's meant to be generic, and one of our concerns, for example, is to be multi-cloud, and so we don't really want to be locked in.
Cool. Okay, just time for one more question. Go on then.
I just wonder what will happen when you make a mistake in the configuration. For example, maybe it will just speed up a lot of services or something like that.
So you don't really want to make mistakes with Crossplane, right? That's the easiest answer I can give you. I think that's what I was referring to, the fact that you need a lot of discipline, because I particularly like creating chaos, right? And push things to see where they're going to break. And one of the things, I've done, and I think they have something in their roadmap for the first quarter of 2024. One of the things I've done is playing around with trying to break this configuration I was mentioning before, the package that we use to publish all our APIs. And it turns out that, if you break it and you delete some of the APIs, it's just going to have a cascade effect and starting to delete all of your things because that API doesn't exist anymore in the cluster. So, of course, there are ways to mitigate, because you have things such as management policies that you can use. So you can tell Crossplane resources, for example, you can just create this thing, but you shouldn't delete it, which means you basically are going to orphan some resources if they get deleted from the cluster. But it can go very wrong very fast.
Brilliant. Okay, big hand for Gabriel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.